As the Formula One season finally heads to Australia to kick off in earnest, one of the topics that we've been looking at through F1 testing but haven't necessarily got a proper read on yet is Renault. Now that obviously means the works team that's trying to take a step towards what you might consider the big three teams. But Renault is of course an engine supplier as well. Now this season they've only got their own team and McLaren, but a lot of the focus has been on Honda, and then of course the Mercedes and Ferrari battle that will be taking place around Honda's Red Bull partnership. I've got Scott Mitchell and Ben Anderson, two experts I'd say on how the various F1 engine manufacturers stack up. And Scott, Renault, always difficult to know exactly where they're at anyway, particularly with their engine, and it was actually quite hard to read in general, I thought, through testing. We occasionally saw a quick lap from the team, but what do we know about the engine? It sounds like there might finally be a bit of confidence there from Renault and from the senior figures that you were talking to during testing.
I think the words and the sort of positivity from the engine guys at Barcelona was decent. It does suggest quite a bit of positivity about it. Not the first time we've heard that, but I guess giving them the benefit of the doubt, they were honest last year. They said that they'd not set high enough targets. So, okay, take them at face value. They've told us when they've done a bad job, so let's trust them and, well, give them the benefit of the doubt that they maybe have done a good job this time. They say that in response to not setting targets high enough last year, they've set their highest targets ever for this year. They said before pre-season testing that they've made a substantial step, and now after 2 weeks of running at Barcelona, they're saying that everything that they've seen on track matches with what the dyno was telling them and what they were sort of seeing behind the scenes. So it does seem to be quite a bit of positivity, whether that's purely on performance, whether it's reliability as well, because 2018 was pretty bad for Renault until the Spec C got introduced, but only on the Red Bull side. And that was really encouraging for Renault. There was a genuine step there. Red Bull and Max Verstappen were able to fight for victories most, if not every race towards the end of the season pretty much. So that was sort of the base of what looked like finally being a top engine from Renault. And everything that they're saying now suggests that they've furthered that, not undone it over the winter. But we've sort of heard that before, so I'm not entirely sure whether their positivity quite matches reality.
Ben, the key thing that Scott said there for me was that we've heard this before from Renault, and we know that Red Bull has heard this many times before and ultimately got tired of it, and that's why they've gone to Honda. Is there any more reason that we should believe them this time?
Well, it does seem that they've made genuine gains with the engine over the winter. The figure being bandied around in the paddock was about 30 kilowatts, which equates to about 40 horsepower. That's a decent step. I don't know if that relates to full beans qualifying party modes or whether that's just baseline race performance. If it's the second, then they'll be very happy, I'm sure. Everyone is world champion in their own head at this time of year, aren't they? In the winter, especially if you've hit your targets, as Tafan claims they have done, you go to the track confident, you've done your job, but you still don't know where you stand against everyone else because of all the various fuel loads, modes, conservatism or not that people employ in winter testing. The problem Renault have got is, okay, they might have made a step against their own baseline, but Honda will no doubt have made a big step over the winter. Red Bull had already calculated that they were no worse off switching to the 2018 Honda engine. Honda have spent a lot of time and money working on that to find more performance for this year, knowing that they're going to be at the front of the field and Red Bull's going to be expecting to win races. Mercedes have done an all-new engine for this year. They always find big steps. Ferrari won't stand still either. So it's a tough environment for Renault to make progress in. And the big question mark for me with them is, even if their winter work has been good and their baseline is solid, in-season development will be the key. And that's where they can often fall behind. Reliability concerns can creep back in. We saw last season with the Spec C engine how they didn't use it because there were some problems with it. Red Bull went with it, but they had further reliability problems. We won't know until we get into that cycle of updating as the pace picks up and the pressure ramps up, whether Renault really are on top of this formula this time.
The curious thing will be whether there's a chance for them to break this cycle that they've been in for the last 5 years now of get quite confident, get to the track, fail to deliver, be really honest and open about it, be a bit more conservative, start to gain performance, and then it all starts again. I mean, just looking back over the what they've done and said since they since the new engine regs came in 2014. You know, they started the season behind. It was awful, but they were saying at the first race that they think they can catch Mercedes this season. 5 years later, and they still haven't caught Mercedes. And every year, it's been to one degree or another. It's been either they overhaul the engine concept and have a load of reliability problems, or they have a little bit of consistency with the concept and then they don't push it hard enough. They go too conservative on the development, and they have changed the engine concept again for this year. It's been described as effectively an all-new engine. So where are they going to be? Is this their chance to break that cycle and finally build on what they had last year, as well as introducing something new and having more potential? Or are they going to go back to square one and we're going to see maybe not them breaking down left, right and centre in the first few races, but are they going to have to back off on performance to preserve reliability? That's the big question. And no matter how honest they've been and how much you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, history is not really with them in this engine formula, so they need to offer concrete proof of progress, I think.
Scott, one thing we've seen through the numbers on our websites and the views on our videos is that the interest in Red Bull Honda is absolutely huge heading into this season. Expectations are really high, but there's also just a level of fascination about maybe what's going to happen next with Honda. They're clearly a big talking point on the engine scene in Formula One. Has the fact that Red Bull, a race-winning team, has moved away from Renault, does that, if anything, perhaps make Renault less important to the wider F1 story this year?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're broadly irrelevant in 2019 because what impact can they actually have on the thing that people care most about? I mean, it's obviously going to have an impact on the midfield battle. It could have a significant impact on whether Renault establishes itself from a works team point of view as best of the rest and can move closer to those top three, because there'll be a different engine in the mix. So that will have a factor there. But how many people are going into the new F1 season thinking, oh, can't wait to see whether fourth place is particularly close to third this year? That's not how it works. You want to see who's going to be fighting for wins and who's going to be fighting for the world title. And while I'm sure Renault can lay the groundwork for something a bit bigger in the future, just purely in the context of 2019, what are they going to do? They're going to be mired in the midfield with either their works team or their customer McLaren. And that could be good for them, because it worked really well for Honda last year, having a season in the midfield to work through your issues, away from having a customer completely slagging you off all of the time. So there are going to be benefits to it, and maybe in the long term it'll work out. But for 2019, I just sort of see it as going to be almost impossible to sort of pick Renault as an engine out as a major storyline.
I can't really agree with claiming the fourth manufacturer team in Formula One is irrelevant. I mean, they're one of the biggest operations on the grid. Okay, they're not performing at the level they need to compete with the other three, but they should be. And this year, they should make a clear step towards bridging that gap. If they don't, then there's massive questions to answer about that programme. They're already behind their own curve in terms of performance and the results they wanted to see as they gear up. Let's not forget, for a championship tilt, they're not aiming to just be best of the rest in Formula One forever, like perhaps Force India are in their current state. Like, this is a team that's being built.
Force India's current state is Racing Point.
Racing Point, of course, yeah. It'll take a while for me to get used to calling them.
There's an Alfa Romeo on the grid as well, not a
There is an Alfa
just in case you're struggling.
So, Renault, formerly Lotus, Team Enstone. That is a team with championship-winning history. It's a manufacturer with championship-winning history. They're a big deal on the grid. They might have a bit less pressure on their engine programme this year from not supplying Red Bull and not letting that team down as Red Bull felt over the last few seasons, but that doesn't mean that the spotlight is off them. They can't really afford to hide like Honda were doing with Toro Rosso last year. The expectation on the Renault team is much higher than that, both outside and internally. And of course, if they fail to bridge this gap or show clear signs that it is bridgeable, that's a massive question mark for Formula One as it gears up for the future. The whole Liberty model of promoting great racing and unleashing the greatest racing spectacle on the planet is built around having 10 competitive teams, not 3. And Renault are the ones most geared up as things stand to bridge that gap. If they don't show signs that it can be done, then the whole sport's going to need a massive overhaul in the future.